Hi, I'm Kira McGran, and I am here hosting Sex, Consent, and Game Mechanics, part of Indie Plus's panel series. And we are here as part of Gaming is Other, but we're doing a Gaming is Women episode where you'll see a few authors from Gaming is Women blog here today. And just as a reminder, this event upholds the Indie Plus community standards. To find out more about the standards, Google Indie Plus community standards. Please be aware that this event may include discussions about descriptions of gender and/or race issues and explicit language. And back to our topic. So we're here to talk about sex, consent, and game mechanics, and the types of negotiations and consent negotiations that happen at the gaming table, and how various games mechanics help or hinder us. And I'm here with Avenel Wing and Rowan Koda and Meg Baker to talk about this. And if we can all introduce ourselves, starting with Avi.
Hi, I am Avenel Wing. I am a writer with Gaming as Women, and I am. Why is my unmute? Sorry. I knew I was going to have one mute issue. So I am a principal with Double Exposure. We run conventions, and I am a LARP designer. So Meg?
Excellent. I'm Meg Baker. I am a game designer and game player and enthusiast. I'm also a sex ed teacher, so multiple ways of interest in this topic.
I'm Rowan. I am a game designer and intersectional feminist activist. I blog both for Gaming as Women and on my personal site. And I also do advising on different community policy issues regarding things like sex and consent. So I'm really looking forward to this panel. I'm sorry, technical difficulties. One moment. I'm trying to unmute Kira. And it's not working. Oh no. Okay, I'm sorry, folks. We will be returning with you in just one moment. Kira, can you try exiting and coming back in?
Well,
Oh,
there
a
we go.
second.
Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
I found a mute button. So, hey, sorry about that. My name is Kira McGran, and I am a queer feminist game designer, a jewelry artist, and I also organize Games on Demand at Origins and Gen Con. It's a whole lot of fun. If you haven't been before, come play some indie games with us. And I also write at Gaming as Women with all of these wonderful people. So now the introductions are over. Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to talk about our topic. What we want to talk about today is, well, the first thing we want to talk about is a positive experience that you've had with consent in a game and game mechanics that have supported it. And so that can kind of revolve around sex and consent or consent in general as far as game mechanics and gameplay go. And we're going to start with Avi.
Okay. Right. So I am going to talk about an experience I had with a group of people that I didn't know. I'd never gamed with them before. I knew them peripherally and very casually socially, and they invited me to come play a game of Monster Hearts. And Monster Hearts has this sort of profound, very evocative mechanic that is, you don't get to control what your internal reactions to things are. Dice rolls tell you how something impacts you, and it's exploring the weirdness of being a teenager when the world doesn't make sense and your body and your brain are doing things that you're not prepared for, but it very, very clearly says, but you are in control as the player of setting your threshold as far as the external reactions. And because it models so clearly for the individual player that you set your threshold for how you express yourself, that it encouraged the entire table to talk about what their comfort level was as far as specific intimate content and about interactions with each other. And we managed to have a 3-person game with a facilitator run for 8 sessions, 9 sessions, without ever crossing anyone's boundaries. And we had a mix of rated R and PG-13 preferences at the game table. And the mechanic putting it out front and saying, you are responsible for moderating yourself, changed, in my opinion, how the table approached their comfort levels and actually opened up more comfort with the concept of sex in a game.
Yay. That's great. So my experiences, is my mic all good? Yay, okay, good. Just checking. Positive experiences I've had lately with sex and consent in games. I have 3. I'll be quick. First, playing Skinner in Apocalypse World. People often play Skinner's or look at the Skinner's playbook as being, this is the prostitute playbook, which I think is a very shallow read of that playbook. I was playing a tattoo artist, and I was in a relation, and like my 2 other people that I was involved with romantically were NPCs, and it was this very interesting thing there that I could have an expression of a different sexuality be completely supported by the game mechanics, and I could even put them on my character sheet, like here are my other partners. And also the ways in which that intimacy of doing tattoo work wound up intersecting with my sex moves and my my character's sexuality when I was interacting with other PCs was really, really cool. Because even though I wasn't having sex with other characters, we were using a lot of the same intimacy mechanics, because one of the other players had whichever, I forget, I think it's the Maester D, whose sex move is, I do a thing for you and it's intimate. And so we had to negotiate where those lines were, looking at the ways the 2 characters intersected and what counts, where are we intimate, how are we intimate, what does that build between us, where is the sexual charge, because there was a sexual charge, and where is that line. And it was a really fun dance along that line, very, very much like heavy flirtation when you, is it gonna go? I don't think it's gonna go, but it was really sexy and really good. Another positive consent game that I was involved in recently enough to remember is 1001 Nights, when I had a character, my young servant boy character was just deeply, deeply enamored of another character. And the way that 1001 Nights works really sets up, you know, I set that as a goal. You know, I want to win her heart, and it wasn't, you know, I want in her bed. It's like I want to win her heart. So the ways that it marched toward achieving that goal, and the other player, you know, it wasn't a given. It was negotiated consent, and where we draw lines and how we drew lines around that, so that it was never a situation of surprise, but always a sexy thing we could play with. And I really dug that. And the third one was definitely playing Spin the Beetle, which is a flat-out, kinky, weird little game about bug sex. And that's hilarious, because we're sitting there, everybody has a different little playbook, and they're reading out the little lines of, you know, will you kiss my hand? Will you nibble my ears? Will you inject your sperm under my carapace so that my eggs will, you know, these weird little half human sex and half bug sex, and the responses are always up to the other player. So I can say, you know, will you do this thing? And it can be human or it can be bug, and whatever way it is, it's kinky, because after you've read so many bug sex things, the human sex things sound really kinky. And the other player gets to respond with, like, yes, but only if this, or oh, of course, but only for you, or oh, that's too risque. That's too much. Choose something else. So I guess they're all three examples of really effective ways to negotiate consent, which I think is where this is all at for me. Is, you know, sexiness is part of it, or can be part of it, but it's a two-way flow. It's not just here's what I want to do to you.
So I'm going to actually take it way back because one of my favorite experiences, and I'm going to tag in on Meg because I have a second one that's really cool. But one of my favorite experiences to talk about was actually back when I first started playing Vampire the Masquerade LARP. And in the book, if you've ever read Mind's Eye Theater Rules for Masquerade, it talks about how there's no touching other people. You go to LARP and you are not allowed to touch other people. And what was really revolutionary for me was that the group I was role-playing with at the time, that rule was across hands without asking first. And so it set up this situation in which every contact of any kind was a consent negotiation. Is it all right if I shake your hand? Is it all right if I touch you on the shoulder? And so from that, as we got into the deeper and more intimate scenes that can happen in a vampire game, it was already a natural progression. You could just roll right into, okay, well, are you all right, you know, physically acting out this hug, or is it all right if I rub your shoulders, or whatever. And because the negotiations had been previously set up, there was no baggage attached if someone said no. That was just, all right, that's where their boundary is. And then Meg reminded me, I'm actually in an Apocalypse World game right now, and I'm playing a Battle Babe. And one of the things I love about the Battle Babe book is that the sex move is that it shuts down any other sex move. So what that says to me is, you know, I've made it clear that this is not an area that my character is really interested in going to, and it's given me that opportunity to say, okay, well, you know, maybe I am interested in interacting intimately with your character, but I'm not interested in you use that as leverage later, which is something like in the fiction that we don't really talk about as part of the consent negotiation, but is really there. Once you've had these interactions with other characters, you know, you've given them a piece of your character. And that's a thing that mechanics don't necessarily make clear. Yes, players are consenting to things, but they're also consenting on behalf of their characters. And mechanics, I think, that support that are a good thing too.
Button. I'm on an iPad. I have to move around a little. No, those are all some excellent stories. I'm just going to give a brief one, in that I find, generally speaking, mini games don't have consent mechanics. So I find it really useful to have something like the X card around to help me navigate that sometimes, or even just using those types of ideas as far as like, if I'm going to do something that might be pushing boundaries in this setting or with this theme, I can always ask somebody, hey, is this going too far for you, or is this okay before I do it as a GM or as a player? I think that that's an interesting way to kind of begin to navigate that, which brings me into our next topic. What would you like to see more of regarding sex and consent in game mechanics, in tabletop RPGs and in LARPs in general? Avi, back to you.
So, something Meg mentioned triggered the thought for me that when you enter a game space where sex and consent are part of the scenario and part of what you're negotiating, I find that there are very poor mechanics for resetting boundaries at the end of a game. Once you've opened yourself up and you've all shared and experienced a vulnerability that is beyond what you would share if you ran into each other on the street, how do you reset, and how do you bring yourself back to a new normal or back to your old normal in a way that acknowledges that the in-game experience was real and tangible and it happened, but then when you leave the table, maybe you're not okay talking about making out, or you're not okay talking about touching each other. And I find that that is the thing that I have to untangle the most within the convention community is, well, we played this game and it was super intense, and then she ignored me. And I'm like, well, yeah, because that isn't what your reality is on a day-to-day basis, and you can't transfer character experiences over to personal dynamics. And I run into very few circumstances where that is addressed except by a community, not by mechanics, and it's not addressed in the material that game designers provide. And so if we're going to talk about sex and consent, we also have to talk about how to roll back to our normal lives. Okay.
That is like directly toward ritual and game design, which is an essay that Emily and I wrote a whole bunch of years ago. But yes, everything that Emily just said, everything that Emily just said about how do you contain the gaming experience. And there are games out there that do this very, very well for other things. I'm thinking of the candle in Polaris specifically, and a little bit the setup for 1001 Nights, where there's like the cloth and the bowl and things like that. But Polaris is exceptionally good at acknowledging in words, in the text, this is a ritual, you do this, you do this thing to begin, and you do this thing to end, and it creates that container, that contained space. So that's definitely something that I think is really good, because that bleed from in-game experience to out-of-game experience is tricky to handle, and it can happen with intimacy on various levels. Like, if I've been really, really, really pissed off at your character, I want to have that not, like, mess up hanging out with you for dinner after. And in character, if you and I have been having all kinds of hot sex, I don't want that to weird out your partner who's sitting next to you in the game when we're, like, hanging out later and I'm, we're not, just that needs to be clear. All those lines need to be clear. What I would specifically like to see more of regarding sex and consent in games, I just think there needs to just have, like, more conversation around it. I would love to have more games where this is the specific point. I'm thinking about Just a Little Lovin', which is the LARP that I haven't played, but I'd love to get a chance to. And there's a game that I've been having, like, trying to find the answer to in my head for several years. It's specifically about being aroused and arousal. So I think that the answer, what I want to see more of, is just more, more games that are exploring. And I don't expect them to be, all of them be, big mainstream things like Monster Hearts. I expect there to be more and more little ones like, okay, let's examine this part. And I want them to be fun. I feel like we've spent a long time with, we have in our hobby history a whole bunch of crap, like rape crap. Don't want to deal with that. Now we're in a place where we're having panels like this, where we're talking about games that give us a really good experience in terms of sex and consent. And I want to move forward with that to be more fun. Like, let's have fun, sexy games. Anna Kreider's Sexy Fun Times. I want that title to be an area of games. Like, yes, these are sexy fun time games. Doesn't mean they're all going to have sex all the time, but that they're lighthearted and sexy and consensual. Yeah.
I mean, wow, that's really hard for me because I have a list and it's like 12 pages long, and if I start in on it, we're going to be here all afternoon and people have other places to go. So I think, like, one of the areas that's not really touched on that I want to see more of is negotiation. I want there to be explicit rules for negotiating consent. I want there to be, to touch back on that idea, like this kind of like almost ritual dialogue about it. So, like, we enter into that as part of the game, and it helps us to frame how we're going to interact and what we're comfortable with. And unfortunately, like, the only things I've ever seen for that so far are really community devised rules that people have come up with. For example, I used to game with someone in Hangouts games, and he would open every time we switched systems with a conversation where the first thing we did was discuss lines and veils. So, what are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? Flag right now what shouldn't even be on the table. But the other half of that discussion, which was really amazing, is that he said, okay, now that you've said that, now tell me what you want. Tell me what what areas of this you do want to explore. Tell me where your buy-in is. And I want games that give rules for how to have that conversation, but that in those rules include, you know, hey, I'm playing Monster Hearts and I want to experience having a really intense crush. That's something that I want to go through, you know. And I think books in general, like they're so busy focusing on the you know, here are the rules for how you simulate these things, and here are the rules for how you transition scenes, and here are the rules for how you make a character. And I want to see more rules for how you talk about the experiences your characters want to have. Be it, you know, I want my character to experience their first kiss, or I want my character to have crazy hot beetle sex, or you know, things I can't even conceive of right now. Like in Eclipse Phase, we had a very similar conversation where we talked about areas of transhumanist sex that we wanted to explore because, you know, in our minds that doesn't look anything like the squishy body sex that we have now. So yeah, I'd really like to see more rules around having those conversations and rules that encourage the positive contribution. Yes, it's important to say, okay, here are my boundaries, don't talk about this, but as a society, we're already terrible about saying, hey, I'm really into that, let's do more of that. So I think if games had that framework, it would be easier to have those conversations in general.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, that's all fabulous. I agree with everything that you three just said. I mean, in general, you know, just going over explicit rules for negotiating consent and what that looks like, having the conversation around sex and consent, even just finding a way to talk about consent so that it is a normal thing to talk about, that everybody understands and kind of has some grasp on, is hard in general, let alone, you know, at a gaming table. And so if everyone has some kind of understanding and framework for that going in, that's really important. I mean, we have some tools, like we have the X card, we have cut and break and LARP, which are very similar to, you know, yellow and red in kink communities, like slow down or stop. Setting boundaries ahead of time, lines and veils, being able to stop things completely when you're uncomfortable or having the freedom to walk away. All of those things are super necessary when talking about these things. And so it's kind of like you almost, what I want is like all of those things, right? Which is super hard, but I think really important if everybody has all of those tools working at once, maybe inside of the game mechanics, but also outside of the game mechanics as a tool to use for any game. And we do have some of those in play, but seeing them used more often would be fabulous. So yes, meta techniques outside of the game. I heard some of you say more asking for permission, more tools to navigate consent at the gaming table. So the last thing that we'll go over real briefly, since our time is almost up, is some examples of games that we love or games that we've played that demonstrate these types of mechanics or initiate this type of consent negotiation. So Avi, we'll start with you again.
I've been racking my brain about games that I would praise for this, and other than Monster Hearts, which I've already mentioned, the thing that keeps coming up is more that within gaming communities, people have managed to take tools that work elsewhere, like Vampire dropping out of character and being like, hey, is this okay? Is this something that you're down with? All of my experiences are community-driven and common language-driven, and so to me that really indicates that there's a void here where there needs to be more design that addresses this. And so I don't have a specific example, and you know, it also says to me I need to play more games that deal with sex and intimacy and negotiations, but like looking at it, I don't have a specific suggestion because in general, I think it's something people shy away from and avoid integrating, even though we're playing, in theory, characters that are full and complete humans, and therefore sex is part of their world. And so my answer is someone designed me an awesome game. I'd be very happy to review it somewhere.
I would recommend Apocalypse World and Monster Hearts and 1001 Nights right off the bat. I would recommend Emily Care Boss's games, Breaking the Ice and Shooting the Moon. I haven't played Under My Skin, so I can't recommend that. It's probably also good. Other games I would recommend, I don't know, those are the ones that come right, like, booming to the top. And I just want to give a little acknowledgement that there are people in our community who identify as asexual, and so that is also a thing. Not everyone wants more sex in their games, and so part of that negotiated community consent and part of the lines and veils things is saying, you know what, not for me. Just don't. I don't want to. I don't have an interest. I don't want to. So, just acknowledging that.
Um, I I gotta go with Monster Hearts too. So let me just say big hearts for Avery in general. Avery's games are all actually really great about consent. They're all really group focused, and they all have a lot of mechanics that support the give and take of conversation. Uh, and consenting not just to sex, but consenting to game events. For example, Quiet Year, which is a communal table game where you put together a map, is all about negotiating consent to what happens as each turn goes on. I mean, you flip a card and it tells you what to do, but then you as a group have to negotiate and consent to how that moves forward and how it changes the map. So I think that this is an area where Avery is really doing some great work, and I'd love to see other designers move in that direction and have those conversations. I think I really want to give some mad props to people who are just writing LARP scenarios and including those things. I've read a couple of really good ones, although it is killing me now to remember the names. There was a really great consent mechanic in the scenario that I read like 5 years ago about playing contestants on a game show. Where you get pitched these challenges that you're supposed to be going through, but there's a give and take of, okay, well, I'm not comfortable with that challenge. How do I, what can we do to shift it? And I think that there are games that do that well also. Fate actually comes to mind as well, because as you're aspecting, that's another thing where you negotiate because other people are giving you aspects and you're negotiating with them to get these aspects that are going to work well for you. I've had that experience playing the giant robot game by David Hill. I can't remember what it's called now. Apotheosis Drive X. Because you aspect the person on your left and then you aspect the person on your right, and so it has to be a conversation where you negotiate what those aspects are. So I think that game does it well also.
Cool, awesome recommendations. I mean, in general, I agree with all of those. I think that LARP does some really interesting things with the cut and break mechanics. I think that games who shift the authority away from the GM offer up interesting consent negotiations too, because it allows players to talk to each other as equals, as opposed to necessarily following prescripted or traditional rules of the GM must tell us everything to do. So, games like Fiasco or Kagamatsu or Dream Askew that are GM-less kind of initiate the conversation amongst the players a little bit more as far as what that looks like. And you even negotiate the fiction, right? And all of that as well. And if sex is in there too, you negotiate that as well. It kind of opens it up for the dialogue to happen. So I think that's excellent. So I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, Meg and Avenel and Rowan, for joining us. I'm Kira McGran. This is Indie Plus. We just talked about sex, consent, and game mechanics. Thanks so much for watching.